so it's not the full 25.
If you want this done quickly, you could authorize up to a certain amount and authorize staff to negotiate the best deal we can get. Then I think that maybe puts it in my hands, and I'm not in a position to decide the tower applications. So it can't be considered to be a contingent. Or anybody else. You could hire somebody other than the board member.
Say we authorize $20,000 and turn it over to you to make the best deal, and you're not involved in any votes, so we're okay to do that.
I think that'd be fairly safe.
So what do you say? So I'll make a motion that we allocate $20,000 to paint the tower and let Mr. Curry, the county administrator, or the negotiator, to get the best, he's pretty good at negotiating, get the best deal possible.
So if I could ask you to add on to that to not fund the post-dispositional program from contingency, rather include it in the upcoming budget public hearing.
Okay.
Okay. And this 20,000 is for contingency.
Right. Got it. Should be enough. If not, I'm sure we're raising up. We'll find out.
Should we go and sell 25?
This gives me more leverage.
This will work.
Okay. All right.
That's a motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Is it possible to get the agenda on this screen also? It's not up there.
There should be one right behind you on the stick.
There's some here.
They're both.
It's the evening also.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you make this discussion? Oh, yes,
And then the tower.
that's correct. What was the discussion?
There was a conversation earlier in the meeting during appointment of planning commission members as to whether the number of planning commissioners appointed by the board, which our local ordinance states is 7, but state code states can be between 5 and 15. Whether our local ordinance is binding upon the board. Mr. Goff performed some research earlier, and depending on that research, I think the board was of mind to potentially appoint additional planning commissioners. I believe I summarized that correctly. This is an item that was added to the agenda, so you will not see it on the screen or on the paper. And Mr. Goff, what have you found related to that item?
Well, the first question was, is the limitation to 7 planning commissioners violative of 15-2212? In my opinion is no, it's not. The code as it's written allows for the locality to make a choice of the number of planning commission members, which of course implies the right to choose that number. Because the Rappahannock County Code sets that number at 7, it's clearly within the number of members allowed by 15.2/2212. And it also provides, as required by that statute, that the members be appointed by the governing body. Therefore, the Rappahannock County ordinance appears to me to be valid on its face. Absent some defect in its enactment fatal to its initial adoption, the current ordinance is valid, and for another reason. The Code of Virginia in 15.2 1427C states that there's a presumption that ordinances adopted shall be deemed to be validly adopted unless some provision of the Virginia or United States Constitution is violated facially by the ordinance itself. And I refer to Covell versus Town of Vienna, 280 Virginia 151, a 2010 case that holds that the same analysis is true for 1427 as it is for 2285. So I think that the statute is valid and that the current board is bound by it. So in order to increase or decrease the number of planning commissioners, you'll have to go through the regular amendment process pursuant to 2285B, which means it has to be referred to the planning commission, and then public hearing has to be had, and then it has to come here for a vote. And you can do that in a joint meeting of the planning commission and the board of supervisors.
So, if I could, and the board, get close to this, that if there's no provision for us to appoint the extra members now, there's no restriction against us just appointing people to be citizen advisory components to the planning commission, is it? Similar to what we did when we hired the Berkeley group.
What this says is that they have to be citizen members, all appointed by the governing body, all of whom shall be residents of the locality, qualified by knowledge and experience to make decisions, provided that at least one half the members appointed shall be owners of real property.
Those are for planning commission members that we would appoint later after the zoning ordinance amendment.
So citizens who do not vote on planning commission matters, I think you could appoint any committee you want to form.
I think
it may be more appropriate for the planning commission to appoint
these people the people that I had thought about proposing would be able to help start doing some work now while this is in the process.
Perhaps the planning commission themselves would form a citizen task force to aid them in their work.
Yeah, I just don't think they'd be members until you changed it.
Right, well, we wouldn't call them that, but I just think that we should we could get something going because the planning commission has been brought down for at least 3 years that we know of. So maybe we can figure out within 5 minutes what to call it and just appoint some members to help do some of the heavy lifting that needs to be done. We did it with the Berkeley group. Chairman there, I believe, he said that they hadn't approved it, and Mr. Curry said he didn't need to approve it. We have a similar situation right now. The planning commission is a creature of statute, and it is subject to the appointments of this body. I don't know why we can't go ahead and appoint a group to work with them.
Yeah, I would say you would just want to make sure that they are positioned to work in a combined force. The sum of the parts is greater than the individual.
Right.
If it's not
they
done,
will be working with, but under the guidance of the current planning commission structure as it is.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Wilson?
We appointed Board of Supervisors representing the Planning Commission earlier today. We also appointed a representative from the Board of Zoning Appeals to the Planning Commission. From where I sit, I think our work for now is done with respect to the Planning Commission. And while I appreciate the need to accelerate work on pending ordinance revisions and comprehensive plan, I would put that decision-making to engage other citizens in the hands of the Planning Commission, pending a change in the zoning ordinance if we were to go that route. But the way Mr. Goff has laid out his legal research, which he conducted today very thoroughly, I don't see any reason why we would be making a decision tonight to expand the number of seats on the Planning Commission.
I have to say I agree, Mr. Wilson.
It wouldn't be expanded. It would just be citizen task force and provide the capacity to the planning commission.
Yeah, I believe that decision could come from the Planning Commission itself, and you would be better in light of the ordinances.
I understand that if it was a perfect world, but they have not wanted that. They have been steadfastly opposed to getting work done and having help to do that, including hiring the Berkeley group.
Right.
So, with all due respect, your plan's not gonna work. So you're sending your plan right back to the same people that have rejected our proposals for 2 years,
Well, you have a new planning commission, so,
by 2 members.
Well, we do actually have
Three.
a new
Three.
appointee from Wakefield District.
yeah, it's 3.
We
So,
have a relatively new appointee from Piedmont District. We have a new Board of Supervisors representative and a new BZA representative.
So that's half of the board.
And so that's 4 of 7.
I was there for a long time, and I'm pretty sure that without a little bit of extra help, we're gonna be in the same quagmire.
Well, I think that I don't disagree, and you know that I think that more hands would make for a lighter workload on that commission. To me, it's just common sense. However, with the change on the commission, perhaps this is an item that they should address at their upcoming meeting before we make the appointment.
We'll see.
My point,
I'll report back.
But from my point, I'll show up and let them know I think it was a good idea.
Well, if I have a consensus from this board, that will be the message that I bring to the planning commission, but I will report back how successful it is.
So, just trying to drive this along, is there a consensus among the board that a, whatever you want to call it, group, citizen task force, you recommend that the planning commission form one to assist them? Is that the consensus that you're seeking?
Well, the thing is, if it's left to the planning commission, then we're going to be squabbling over on that side of the point.
Try it, just try it, maybe be surprised.
Yeah, you're right, I would be surprised.
And if it's a recommendation of the board,
yeah, as Mr. Goff has referenced legal research, as the governing body and the code as written, I don't believe we should be in a position to make a decision to expand membership for individuals involved in planning commission decisions at this time, pending any kind of changes on the ordinance.
And I did want to echo
County ordinance.
to thank you, Art, for looking into that in the very brief time that you had between earlier today and this evening to provide us that background information as well.
you're welcome, my pleasure.
Is there any other further discussion? That takes us to R5.
which is deferment from earlier of the advertising requirement for the upcoming personal wireless services facilities applications. As the board is aware, CWS submitted 2 applications, application for a tower in the Scrabble area, and application for a tower in the Woodville area on the Eldon property. The Planning Commission held a public hearings for both, and then held a second public hearing for the Woodville site. Ultimately, the Planning Commission recommended the board approve the Scrabble tower in the form of a monopole that is painted appropriate color, and recommend the board disapprove the Woodville tower, even in its proffered lower 139-foot height. With that said, the Planning Commission's work on this matter is done, and it's now before the Board of Supervisors. Code of Virginia and your local code require you to hold public hearings for each. And the Code of Virginia sets the 150-day shot clock before which you must approve or deny. And if you don't meet that, then they're automatically approved. The applicant entered an agreement with the county to extend that by an additional 60 days, and that brings you to the end of February to make a decision. I received communication today from CWS, and there was some back and forth. But ultimately what they've said is CWS would like to defer action on the Woodville cell tower application, PWSFU 190801, until such time as we can adequately address the concerns expressed by the Planning Commission members at the December 18, 2019 meeting. As such, we are willing to extend the telecommunication shot clock through April 30, 2020. Thank you for presenting this to the Board of Supervisors. In an earlier communication, I reminded Ms. McCreary that the board previously indicated they wanted an extension on both. She understands that, and they would like to move forward with the Scrabble Tower without an extension, but are offering an extension for the Woodville Tower. All that said, included in the packet is a draft public hearing ad that needs to be in the newspaper for a public hearing, and staff has recommended throughout this process that public hearing take place not on a normal board meeting night because of the expected number of people. And after polling board members on availability, Monday, January 27th, between your availability and the availability of the high school auditorium, Monday the 27th at 6 p.m. Worked. I'm not sure if the board would like to move forward with that based on the proposal from CWS and hold just one public hearing that night, or you could reject their proposal to extend and hold both. But you must hold public hearings for both before making a determination. You do not need to accept their proposal. It needs to be a mutual agreement.
Mr. Whitson?
For the benefit of people who are here who weren't here earlier, we did approve contingency fund spending for an engineering study, basically to determine the theoretical propagation from Boston and Sperryville towers, as those would relate to towers in between. And I think that's an important step in arming our county government in at least being able to evaluate from an empirical data standpoint what these towers mean in terms of, do we need them as part of a network or not? I think the shot clock offered from CWS is actually good in light of our earlier decision, because it gives us more time to collect the data from that study and hopefully analyze it to make a good decision. In an ideal world, I'd like to see both of them extended, since they've offered one, and I don't know if they would be willing to consider putting the Scrabble Tower on the same extension.
I opposed that earlier and they did not. However, if your response is, and there's no opportunity for dialogue or negotiation right now through the internet. But if the response of the board is the only way you will extend the shot clock for the one is if they're both extended, then take it or leave it, then it's up to CWS to accept that. And if they don't, you would have to be prepared to go to public hearing for both at the date you decide, which is now set up for January. So,
Can you meet the advertising deadline on it?
yes. But
When will I have to get back to you?
it needs to be in this week's paper.
So it's up to them whether they'll agree or disagree.
Yep. Then they would have to decide tomorrow, basically.
So,
Or you could decide tonight to bifurcate the process, and knowing that I would think that if the Scrabble site is built and populated with cell equipment, it, I believe, diminishes their position of the need for the remaining tower. And I don't, but they, or it proves it. That's the path they want to take.
Did you have any idea of how long the propagation study is going to take?
I was told I will have the information before the 27th. Now we've expanded requests, assuming they can still be doing that.
I wonder if is there a way to conditionally approve this, based on your response from them within the next, by end of business tomorrow?
Yes. Yes, I think you can authorize me and Michelle to advertise both public hearings as shown in this ad. If by the end of tomorrow we don't have approval from CWS to extend the shot clock for both to the April date that they proposed, knowing that if they say no, we're going. And you've lost that opportunity to push the one off, possibly. Or unless, so it depends on the latitude you want to give me to negotiate with them. Or somebody, you can empower the chair to do it. Or somebody else.
Yeah, CWS has demonstrated a willingness to consider an expanded shot clock. I would ask them to put both in there. It's been a long review process already. I don't think April is that much longer in the grand scheme of things, and I think CWS would respect us wanting to have our own independent information with which to make a reasoned and informed decision. So I would ask them to consider extending the deadline for both, knowing that we may end up just back where we started, which should be okay given the likely predicted time of the completion of the engineering study.
So is that a motion to authorize staff to advertise as shown unless we receive agreement from CWS to postpone both?
Thank you. I'll get better at articulating motions.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That takes us back, I think, to the regular discussion items. S1, Flint Hill Volunteer Fire and Rescue borrowing local government approval.
Came to my attention, Mr. Williams actually, I believe, that Flint Hill Volunteer Fire and Rescue has an interest to purchase a new 2018 pumper truck, which you heard about earlier in public comment, as a principal amount of $320,000. I'm not sure the current fire and rescue members from Flint Hill may not have gone through this borrowing process, bonding process before. I certainly have not. I understand Company 9 had a few years back, but IRS Code Section 147F of the IRS Internal Revenue Code of 1986 requires that the board, the elected public body, hold a public hearing to consider and approve such borrowing when using this particular type of bonding method. Again, I've never gone through this, I've just read the code. Based on that, I requested of Flint Hill Volunteer Fire and Rescue, for the board's benefit, details of what the company plans to purchase, why the purchase is prudent, and information showing that the company has the necessary predicted revenue stream to support the borrowing, thereby not financially stressing the company to the point that it may be in jeopardy of continued service to the community. Flint Hill representatives did provide some feedback. I asked for that to be sent in a more formal manner on letterhead so it would be easier for you to digest. If you did not receive So ultimately, at this point, a public hearing is required by the Internal Revenue Code before the board could take a position on this, and that public hearing needs to be advertised in your typical manner. That public hearing could be set for February 3rd. I've also noted that if you would like, you may consider referring this to the Fire Levy Board. That would delay the process. If you were to refer it to the Fire Levy Board to get into the details of whether it's appropriate, the piece of apparatus is needed, what the consequences to the community are with or without the piece of equipment. So right now, staff is looking for direction from the board on when you would like to have us schedule such a public hearing.
Just refresh my memory, was it the association that was working on the full inventory of all of the vehicles? Or was that folks on the fire?
The Fire Levy Board has attempted to do that. And I don't want to speak for the Fire Levy Board when the chair is here.
You're doing great.
But it's not, those items are not required by the annual audit. There's been some discussion of expanding the annual audit to include assets and liabilities. And the Board of Supervisors funds operational funds for the companies, and you do not fund much capital. There has been some resistance, I think is a reasonable term, by the companies to have the county and board get too involved in their capital decisions. They are independent companies. While yes, there is some work at the Fire Levy Board to try to capture apparatus, to get an idea of long-term potential capital spend needed to be viable, it's not concluded in any way that I understand.
And it also, the other component that I seem to recollect played into this was if we knew what we had, we would know where it could best be utilized.
Yes, so ultimately, each fire company is an independent company, and theoretically, they are positioned through their board structure and chiefs to determine what's necessary in their district. And they're the experts to make those decisions. That said, the bonding, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Code requires such a public hearing for some reason. And it needs, those companies are acting as agents on our behalf to take care of fire and rescue. So I don't know the legal ramifications of what happens specifically if a company were to fail and a big bond was floating out there. I just don't know those answers. Those are sort of things we would have to research before the public hearing, so you're making an informed decision after hearing some stuff. Or you could test the Fire Levy Board with them.
It would appear to me that if the governing body has to hold a public hearing before it may approve something, then we have some liability.
I don't know why you would have to hold a public hearing if you have no liability, but it's certainly a question we would want to fully consider and understand. You would want to fully consider and understand before taking the action after the public hearing. There may be other forms of borrowing that are available to Flint Hill that do not require this kind of bonding and this kind of borrowing and this kind of public hearing. I don't know.
This is similar to an industrial development plan,
Possible.
which would require us to be the backers of it, basically.
I don't know. There are many details that need to be confirmed to understand that what the board is approving, what the risk is.
On the embedded question of whether it would be appropriate to send this to the Fire Levy Board to look into the details. Mr. Frazier, since you've been serving on the Fire Levy Board, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the primary scope of their responsibility is to look at each company's P&L from an expense standpoint, not necessarily or even at all looking at capital equipment.
No, but they have no authority to make decisions on whether somebody is viable.
Right. So sending it to the Fire Levy Board would be surely for the sake of providing expertise and viewpoint review. Yeah.
But I think you have to have a two-pronged effort going. I mean, if you're asking me my opinion,
Yeah.
then we would need Mr. Curry or Mr. Goff or both to check into the liability issue of it. When I first heard about this, again, you know, if it's like an industrial development authority bond where we have to hold a public hearing or one has to be held in the locality, and we're basically the backers of that bond. This isn't a private loan from the bank.
Madam Chair, I know Company 4 has done an amazing job getting more volunteers, getting your building together, getting just out on calls more, which I do greatly appreciate. My concern, given the audit that I read and speaking to others in the county, is this the right time to make a jump like that when you're still building your foundation, basically? I don't think there's a sense of urgency other than there's the potential for missing this one tanker. It's my understanding that there's trucks available all the time, and it sounded like you've already seen 3 others. I would like to recommend that we could hear from, I had asked if Kevin Williams and Todd from Chester Gap was in favor of this, and I thought that the answer was yes. I went and met with them and found out that they're not as comfortable with it either. I wonder if it wouldn't make more sense for us to try to figure out how to help you in the next 4, 5, 6 months, get your numbers really strong. I understand there's a survey coming out shortly that will show us, you know, the improvement that you've made, which is great, and try to get your audit straight and what was recommended there as well, and then come back to this body and say, we're ready. I do appreciate everything you do.
So if the board is going to hold a public hearing, it would have to be on a specific borrowing, is my understanding. So I heard earlier that maybe the truck may not be available if it delays too long. And so that particular vehicle may be problematic for Flint Hill if they wanted to charge for it, just based on the timing that it couldn't happen until February at the earliest because of the advertising requirements. And I don't know if that's a problem. If they are thinking they want to move forward regardless of what they're going to do.
Is the audience allowed to speak?
If the board wants a member to address the board, you can.
Mr. Williams?
So one thing as far as their letter that they're asking you to sign, and being assistant chief at Chester Gap when we went through it, if you look at the letter, if they have in bold letters there that for what the board would be signing or what you would approve Mr. Curry to sign, but it says in bold letters that this approval does not in any way constitute any financial involvement or obligation of municipality in there. In what you would be signing. Basically what that is, what you're signing, looking into it is basically stating that you're stating that they are a fire and rescue department within this county and that they are providing firefighting services and everything to the county. That's what is in that. It's the same company that we used at Chester Gap when we got our tanker there. And they just require this form to be signed, and then there's a public hearing held after that so we can just basically document public was for or against and everything. And that meeting was held right at the station. We were the ones that conducted that meeting. We opened the meeting, we closed the meeting. The company was present and everything. So,
How did it, in any way, shape, or form, did that compensate for the language that says the governmental body?
I'm sorry?
It says that the governmental body will do that.
We'll do
In
It's a public hearing.
the code may have changed since,
Yes, it could have changed since we had ours. When we had
I was
ours,
sitting here
it
thinking,
was basically,
when did that happen?
the county administrator had to sign it when we got ours. Basically,
But he had no authority to do it, we didn't tell him to do it.
well, this has been 3 or 4
there's
years
a
ago.
pretty good document linked to the board docs.
Yeah, so the county had to sign it in order for us to go forward with it. But when we done it, the public meeting was held at our station and everything. Like Mr. Curry said, it could have changed by now.
I don't remember it happening, but I guess it did.
But the one thing I want to go on record for, as far as what Ms. Donahue was talking about, I've only had one conversation with someone from Flint Hill about that, and that was when they called to ask for this to be signed. No one has asked, which they don't have to, as far as my opinion, whether for, not for, against, or anything. So I haven't expected anybody there to say, whether from me as county employee, whether supported or not supported as emergency manager and all that. I do think there's some things we can look at. I like to know, like, what's there, why are they needing it, and everything, what is there. I did ask, when the gentleman called to ask for this to be signed, a strategic plan, as far as what the truck's going to be used for, why they need it, and everything. As Mr. Curry stated, we hadn't received any of that. So as far as conversations with them from my office for, against, or anything, none of those have happened. This is the only thing they reached out for, was to get this signed.
And the purpose of the loan company requiring that and being there during their meeting is the loan company measures the positive and negative responses. If the negative responses are heavy, then why should the loan company loan the money? And that's what their meeting was with the loan company 5 years ago.
Yeah, and one thing with this company, if they go through them and get the loan, every year they have to turn in their taxes and a copy of their current audit. So this company looks over that to make sure, like basically make sure they're going to get their money, that you currently still have all the money, you're still bringing in money to pay the payments and all that. So right now for Chester Gap, they still have to, every year, as long as they're paying on it, turn in their copy of their audit and their taxes.
So it's like the code was changed in 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar.
Is it all right with you, Madam Chair, Mike speaks?
Mr.
Company
Sands?
Ford, no, Mike, sorry. Mike from Company Ford.
Just wanted to add also, all of our pieces of apparatus in our building is paid for. Our newest piece of apparatus is our 2007 Smil fire engine, which is back in the day was $374,000. 2 years we had it paid for. So we just wanted to add that, see if it helped. We do plan on having a bunch of fundraising activities. We do have a whole list. I don't know if we brought them here. Our biggest one is our boot drive. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
I did find it interesting when I first started talking about this, as to why a 501c3 has to have permission to spend money. And that I'm still not sure I clearly understand, but I do know that if something should happen to you guys and you couldn't be able to pay the bills and we lost you, it would be a big loss to this community. So.
So it seems like we don't want to send it down to the fire levy board.
Well, I would know, I mean, they could certainly review it and ask some of these questions, but again, the liability issue that I was concerned with.
So that's the main thing. I think maybe we should concentrate on the liability issue, and then once we figure that out, moving on to public hearing, depending on how that washes.
Well, I think the continued solvency of Flint Hill is a concern and it should be addressed so that the public, everybody's comfortable. So I don't think sending it to the fire levy to review it. There's a meeting coming up, I don't know if you got time to actually do any work on it.
The meeting's on the 21st. If you look at the board makeup, the only fire-related people that are on it are the association rep and the fire chief. Everybody else is a non-firefighter. So for them to be able to look and say, do they need it? Does it fit in their district? Is not an answer that the majority of the board can answer.
I don't remember your name, I apologize.
Mr. Curry, you were saying that you needed more information on why we needed it, what we were going to use it for, and why we thought it was useful to us. As you said, we're getting more members, but we're still going to load on a fire engine requires more personnel to do the proper job of the fire engine. Where a tanker, you can go out driver only, and you can still get it done by delivering water, shoveling water back and forth to the scene. So therefore, less personnel per vehicle, and you can still get it out and do what you need to do with it. That's what we were looking at.
Is the liability side was something that Mr. Goff could help?
I'm sure he and I can review this section of Internal Revenue Code, and if the board wanted to, I've reviewed the linked information enough to convince myself that the board needed to hold a public hearing. If you're of a mind to potentially move this forward, that can only happen with a public hearing. And I'm sure when it's held here, it meets the test, so you could authorize staff to advertise a public hearing and come back to you with the analysis of the borrowing method, the risks involved, so that you have that information as input to your decision made after a public hearing and knowing what's at stake. So we can move it forward as quickly as we can at the February 3rd meeting and hopefully provide you all the information you need to know what's at stake to make a decision, by making a decision.
Do we have a decision that we're required to make after a public hearing?
Yes, yeah. I don't know if you deny it, it necessarily kills it. It probably informs the lenders. But again, that's all information that we can bring to you.
Yeah, I think I'd be inclined to make a motion that we hold a public hearing and direct staff to help us understand better potential liability associated with this, and finally clear guidance on what the vote would actually mean, or the decision would actually mean, given that this seems to be more IRS related than us approving or denying an independent company's right to do this.
And I assume that public hearing will be at your next meeting.
I mean, public hearings are running next
One more.
This motion, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Takes us, I believe, to execute the signed ordinance amendment referral to the Planning Commission.
The board's aware at your last meeting, there was discussion regarding the sign ordinance as it relates to the types of signs that are allowed at your volunteer fire rescue company properties. And the ongoing discussion regarding the sign that was installed at the Amesville Volunteer Fire and Rescue Station. At the last meeting, board directed staff to develop an ordinance amendment that would permit by right the use of signage such that has been installed at Amesville. And so what myself, Mr. Goff, and Ms. Summers did is draft a resolution that encompasses an ordinance amendment that you could, by passing the resolution, you would be referring the specific language included to the Planning Commission and directing them to hold a public hearing on that matter and requiring them to report back to you 100 days after the first meeting of the commission after your referral. If they do not report back within that period, you can move forward with your own public hearing. So what is critical here is if the board would like to pass a resolution referring the matter, that you do so with the language that you are comfortable considering ultimately at your public hearing. And I've shared this draft language with the board previously, and of course it's been on board docs. For that, there's no doubt will be support for an amendment such as this, and support, and I guess those against an amendment like this. It largely or generally removes the illumination requirements for signs of a certain size from county, school, fire and rescue company, or county created bodies such as the rec authority, library, water sewer board. It also essentially grandfathers in the existing location of signs at those locations, which may not be in keeping with the current ordinance setback requirements. With that, Mr. Coffer, I agree with
the setback requirements.
Pardon me?
The setback requirements.
That's right.
You said repeat it if you don't want to.
Some of the existing, I should give you the background. Ms. Summers, myself, Mr. Goff visited each of the fire company signs, each of the school signs, and county signs, and reviewed them, took measurements, took photographs. Some of them do not meet current setback requirements. Some of them may pre-exist 1986 and would be subject to an earlier zoning ordinance. But to the extent that could be not clear, this would make it clear that the location that the signs are currently located are acceptable going forward for future signs.
The sites without signs will fall under setback requirements.
Yes.
This is only a size up to a maximum that's already spelled out in here and would allow them to be electrically built.
This maximum signage was set to fit the largest sign, which is the current Amesville sign, which is rather large when you're standing right next to it, but it's quite a ways off the road.
I think this fits what the board was looking for the last couple of months.
I will note that the Planning Commission held a public hearing on an amendment to 170-94 that would, with language to add fire rescue companies to the paragraph M that would excuse the companies from filing for a permit for certain types of signs. The Planning Commission recommended this board not approve that recommendation. I suspect partially because they knew this was in the works. That public hearing is scheduled for your February meeting if you are inclined to hold it. it would not be needed and not recommended by staff if you're aligned to pass this. We do believe that permits should be applied for these type of signs, even if they are allowable by right. It sets very clearly in the record what was installed when, and that it meets the confines, and you have that zoning permit, which is very important moving forward for future non-conforming, if the ordinance changes, they would have a piece of paper for that.
I'm in favor of this. I would put this in the forward in the form of a motion.
That's move approval of the resolution.
Need a second.
Do I have a second? And this is to send it down to the planning commission.
Right, so this is referring to the planning commission for them to hold a public hearing on this specific language and to provide their recommendation to you within 100 days. But after this happens.
We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? I'll second. It's roll call vote.
Yes.
Do we have discussion? Sorry.
Yes, we can have further discussion.
Thank you. I do have several references in the Flint Hill area that are concerned with the wording here. And what I was hoping maybe we could edit the located on property owned or leased by the organizations listed in paragraph C above, or on other property not owned or leased by them, but by permission of the owner of such property. I think to commit to put some sort of electronic signage on a property that we don't even own is a little extreme, because it could end up in the middle of a field.
Well, first that sheet C should read D, so
Oh, thank you.
thank you. We looked at it 50 times.
Which ones, what are we talking about?
In paragraph E,
Oh, the reason for that,
but it should be D.
A, B, C, D, E.
In paragraph E, the
D.
reference to C should be D.
Okay. But the part that you're worried about, Ms. Donahue, is by permission of the owner of such property?
Correct.
Yeah, we were wondering about the Flint Hill sign. That was actually the inspiration for that line. How it sticks out on the corner of Fodder Stack and Zachary Taylor. And we didn't think that that was property owned by the fire department. And so we thought, and we don't know if they leased it or not, so we thought that they had looked to me like they had just wheeled one of those little wheelie signs out there and sat it there, and plugged it in with an extension cord. So I don't know where the Flint Hill guys went. I could ask them.
They started running.
That's why that's there. And sure, you can, I tell you what, you might want to leave it in there now just to find out, because we may want to put a better wording in there once we have a public hearing and talk to Flint Hill. For the purposes of today, just to get it down to the planning commission, I'd leave it in just to, to keep the realm of possibilities open as to what that's really supposed to say.
So, Mr. Curry, you mentioned at the outset that you wanted us to settle on language that was close to
It's cleanest and clearest direction to the planning commission with specific language. And let me just add to the discussion relative to the location. And I had this conversation with Ms. Donahue this morning. There is some risk with this language in that fire companies could have off-premise signs nowhere near their station.
Correct.
And you could insert language into immediately adjacent parcels or something like that to condition, to narrow
Well, also there's the aggregate.
the aggregate sign. They might have one sign and it's a mile away. Yeah, the 7,600 square inches, they can have 4 signs, but it has to fit in that total area.
I don't mean to undo this whole discussion, but as a citizen watching the back and forth on the Amosville sign, I'm still left with the question, the sign is up, there seem to be procedural problems at the planning commission. They finally went and did what they did. I'm not looking to tear the sign down, but my question is, aside from a change in the ordinance along the lines proposed here, and Mr. Goff and I have talked about it, I've just received a lot of constituent feedback in the last few days, very concerned about this. I'm just trying to rethink administratively, how can we work with Amosville without opening the Pandora's box to electronic signs all over the county?
Staff has already come to the position that we would support a special exception request application by Amosville Volunteer Fire and Rescue to seek illumination other than external illumination. That's already provided for in the code, but it would require a special exception. They've been disinclined to do that.
If I could, I cannot read people's minds, but I'm pretty sure that those signs have not been approved, had they been applied for previously. But I don't know why there's this argument that there would be signs all over the county that's specific for X number of locations, and maybe not every one of them are applied for.
Right. So,
But I really could do, enlighten me as to where that argument comes from, that they'll be all over the county. This is very specific as to who it applies to.
Well, it does say Rappahannock County government or such other boards or authorities created by schools, fire departments.
Right, but it's still very limited. We only have a couple pieces of property that this would apply to.
I don't mean all over the county in terms of frequency, I mean geographically. And I have to say that while I accept the Amosville sign where it is, I've been driving past it every day for the last 3 weeks, and it worries me a little bit paving the way for a sign like that to go in other locations. I think Amosville for me is acceptable largely in part because of its location right on 211. But then I think about Washington Volunteer Fire Department and leading into a scenic town. I think about Flint Hill and what signs like that would mean to those spots. And like I said, I've received direct constituent feedback from people within the Hampton district, which would include the Washington Volunteer Fire Department and residents who live near the Flint Hill company. So I just have concerns, having received that feedback, having talked with Mr. Goff previously, thinking that this type of amendment would make sense. I'm now questioning if there isn't a better way to accommodate what Amosville has done at great expense to them, but not opening this up in a wider way.
But really, I mean, I guess you specifically don't want a little Washington for Flint Hill. Because the school, the high school already has one. The elementary school is down the side road. The water and sewer authority, you can't hardly get there if you know how to get there. So I don't know where it's going to go that'll help it.
what about the idea of just striking the paragraph E and also just striking everything but fire departments? And I'm wondering if there's any toning down that could happen, because I drove by there the other day and I felt like I was shot in the face because it's so abrasive and bright. And I just wonder about the problems of Rappahannock County. I know we got one at the school, but I've only heard complaints about the one at the school since the day it went up. So I'm just wondering about the whole thing, frankly. The signs there, if there was some way to like just tone it down a little, and maybe turn it off at night or something, but even in broad daylight, it's really bright and distracting. So serves its purpose. I've also received a lot of complaints about it, and I think there's a little fear of the unknown by, allowing these signs speckled throughout the county, even if it only is at fire departments and schools and government.
If you
At the
will,
very least, we could just tone it down just to the fire departments and hope that they would be not so bright.
But there's already one at the school.
and the county government, the
There's
county
only one
government
there,
basically
but,
exempted anyway.
I always thought the school property was exempt anyway.
But not necessarily, but a county government property would be exempt, it's already in our ordinance. So if you tone it down to just fire departments, as you say, you use your phrase, tone it down to fire departments, you haven't done anything. The argument is specious because we're saying that they're gonna be all over the county, but they're only gonna be at specific locations, and the only two that I hear a problem with is Little Washington and Glen Hill. And if the real reason is to not find a way to fix this, then what are we doing this time?
Well, I think we should restrict it as much as possible. I just don't think lighted signs belong in that one.
They had a lighted sign, and I love lighted signs. No, I'm not one of the few. People like to know what's going on. And you don't have to look at it when you go by there, but it can be used for a lot of things, not just a ham and oyster dinner and advertise that, but an Amber Alert. A fire and...
No, I get that. I get that. And it would be really nice if there was a way to portray that information not so abrasively. It's just a matter of aesthetics.
I think Amosville has indicated that they'd be open to turning the sign off at
That
night.
would be
They
great.
have said that.
I think that they would be open to any
We
reasonable
talked a lot about the
condition.
view shed tonight, when
The
it comes to traffic.
Amosville sign cannot be turned off at night unless you go back every day to reprogram it.
Okay, well, maybe it could just be turned down.
It does have two brightness levels according to the
It might have
specifications.
some brightness.
And I think it automatically dims at night. Or it could be programmed such.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a finer point on what I said, I'm not speaking of Flint Hill and Washington because they're in unique locations. It's just those are the ones relevant to the calls that I've received. And so when I think about those locations compared to Amosville, it's a much different scenario. And again, I talked to Mr. Goff about this draft and in principle supported it. But as I thought more about it and heard from people, including this morning, I'm just trying to think of a better way because I have no problem with the Amosville sign. I agree with Mr. Parrish, it's pretty bright, but again, its location on our one major highway is a bit of a saving grace. I feel like this is too much of a non-customized solution that just opens us up to more electronic signs that really don't fit everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean at all the companies and all the locations. So it comes back to special exception.
We're talking a maximum of 7. Well, they couldn't apply for a special exception or a special use permit and get it approved. It wasn't gonna happen.
Well, this is the body that would approve a special exception.
Now, but not before.
Well, it is now.
Right.
Now is now.
Now it's not.
Right,
And I'm not sure that this board would approve it now. But it sounds.
I would imagine you would approve, if you were reminded to approve this ordinance, then you probably would be of a mind to approve a special exception for only one of the signs permitted by this ordinance.
Yeah, it'd be better.
But I don't see how we can discriminate against one company or another.
Special exception is intended to consider site-specific conditions.
I understand that, but you're trying to do something after the fact and then discriminate going forward. I don't see how that's gonna work.
The county didn't set the timeline on that.
The county's culpable.
The county recommended application for a special exception many months ago.
They wouldn't have gotten it.
Well, I for one would support a special exception for Amosville, and I would certainly entertain with an open mind any other requests for special exceptions from other fire companies, recognizing that each site is different.
I feel the same way.
I want to make sure it's clear that there was a question of whether the interpretation of the local ordinance that would provide for a pathway for a special exception for an alternate illumination method was valid. The zoning administrator, in consultation with the county attorney, issued a determination that it was, and included the code mandated statement that the determination could be appealed within 30 days. That determination was not appealed, and as such, that determination is a thing decided, and it is valid.
Unfortunately.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Roll call vote.
Yes.
Mr. Frazier? Ms. Donahue?
No.
Mr. Woodson?
No.
Mr. Parrish?
No.
Aye for me. Thank you.
Motion passes.
Now, is it possible to make a motion for a special exception? Do we have that authority?
It relies on the company to apply.
We have to apply. Then we have to have 2 public hearings, one at the planning commission, like one at the board level, and they're not of a mind that they're going to get a fair deal.
I've done everything I can to convince the company that staff supports it. We're pulling for them.
You were holding for this.
We were directed to do this, and we did this. You said you liked
So
it.
we directed you to do this, you were supportive of this, and then they voted it down. So what's the next step? The next step is to tell them to do something that they've been afraid to do for months.
I'm not going to get into an argument, but
No, I'm just trying to make, factual comments here because this is the process.
Can we,
I think we just need to, maybe if we feel like special exceptions going forward as individual board members, then perhaps the thing to do would be reach out as an individual board member and encourage Amesville to move forward with a special exception.
yep, and once that application is submitted, then we can,
It will have to be vetted by the planning commission and go to public hearing at that level before it comes to this board for a public hearing.
and they do not have to hold a public hearing. They can immediately refer to the board if they want to.
Really?
They may hold a public
Yeah,
hearing.
the problem is, we just keep dancing around this. And how do they know how to act? It's kind of like what we're doing. We're doing the same thing now to the people with these signs that Mr. Sharp complained about earlier with this town. Nobody seems to be going in the same direction. It's like somebody said here a couple of years ago about Rappahannock County government. They said at least for the Keystone Cops, they were all eventually going in the same direction. But on the Eileen thing and on these signs, we've got the thing up here in Sperryville, we're not going in the same direction.
Well, it does beg the question what the staff activity with the sign enforcement has been as of late, and what are the intended actions of staff moving forward on sign enforcement.
It's also a great segue to matters presented by the board.
I guess that's
Okay.
our next agenda item. So I guess I'll just read that question. Yes. Yes, so the discussion letter presented by the board that was moved, item L from the earlier meeting. So I do wonder what staff activities have been regarding signs.
Upon receipt of the 20-page FOIA request from a local attorney, staff reviewed that, and given the time of year, decided it probably wasn't the best use of our time just before the holidays to issue a number of letters, but the zoning administrator will be looking into each one of the alleged violations in that letter and sending a friendly notice to the locations who have confirmed violation to let them know that that their signage is not in keeping with the ordinance, and they may not be aware of what the ordinance says, and giving them an opportunity to debate that issue. And if they don't do that, then we'll move on to the next step, which is a notice of violation.
Great. How many do this include?
Well, there were a number of alleged violations. There's a significant amount of research that needs to go into whether they are actual violations at the time the zoning administrator visits. A lot of them are old, and the illumination portion of the ordinance was put in much later than the zoning ordinance itself. It's a lot to be reviewed.
And will there be documentations of this research available to the board?
Sure. I mean, the file will have to be built to substantiate the actual enforcement.
And will the board be kept in the loop on enforcement activities?
Yes. And ultimately, if enforcement takes the long road, we would have to notify you within 30 days of bringing any court action. We aim to let you know well before that.
But you don't anticipate the zoning administrator sending out 40 letters all at once?
They will, no, there'll probably be batches of types of signs based on her ability to get to the field, document. Everything that she does has to be in a way that ultimately would support court action.
Right.
I would be very happy if she would attack the better signs first.
What type?
Those big long ones that go up to the ceiling and flop around.
The
Feather
feathers.
signs.
Animated signs that are
Well,
the feather ones,
The
yeah.
feather ones, yeah. I think that's what we call them.
Right, well, this is items presented by the board, so any other items for the board to
I
present?
have a quick one. I was really excited to talk about this. It's now 9 o'clock, so I'll keep it 2 minutes, 1 minute. I want to thank Gary for putting me in touch with Oliver Price and Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. I'm sure some people here have seen that REC has been clearing right-of-ways to improve electrical reliability. Put bluntly, REC's contractor, Pittman, left a huge mess, including large ash trees that were felled into the Rush River, creating a potential flash flooding issue. This was all along Harris Hollow Road. Mr. Price, who was here earlier today, I just want to commend him for reacting quickly and for REC getting their contractor back out there. And also I want to commend REC's forester, Percy Montesinos, who I thought handled the landowners very, very well. The contractor was out there on Christmas Eve day cleaning up large ash trees that had been left behind on the previous cut. And Mr. Montesinos, I'm sure would have preferred to have been with his family when he was there making it right. So I want to commend REC for making this situation right after a few landowners are very upset with what had been left behind. So just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. And I want to encourage the public, if you see any right-of-way clearing that is left a mess like we saw along Harris Hollow Road, please let county administration know so we can get it cleaned up.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Dunn.
the one thing that I would like to bring up is the idea of education and classes for the board and others on the planning commission and that type of thing. I know we have a set budget at the moment, but I do believe many of us would like to attend and be educated in any way we can to help the county. So I just wanted to bring that up as a potential increase in the budget item.
And there are a couple of key training items coming up through VACO, the new board member class, indoctrination, We've been looking for the date on that. I'm not sure if we know that. And there is a chairs and vice chairs session coming up. Mr. Parrish,
I attended that, it was very helpful.
so if chairs or vice chairs are interested in attending that, let admin know. We'll run down the details. If there isn't enough budget in your training line, I believe it's $3,000 total, there may be an opportunity to transfer around inside your budget or assign contingency. Training is one of the areas that I would always advocate that we fund to the extent that we can.
Is there, do you think, an advantage in having someone come teach planning here to us? Since there are several new members of the planning commission.
In my last locality, we had Mr. Chandler come to the BZA and sit with the BZA for an hour or so and run through this thing.
He's been out here twice. Once we conducted something years ago at the library, and then they did something down here at the fire hall back about 4 years ago.
So we can look into, I'm not sure who would hold it. I'm not sure if he's actively engaged anymore, but
He just had a health issue. But he is the guru of zoning in the state.
Was it something that the Berkeley group offers, or is that not?
possibly.
You'd be more, you'd be better off having somebody.
Have the VCU group who's now heading that up. I'm sure we have people I can look into.
That would be great.
But you're talking about land use training, right?
I did want to mention, just to follow up on our joint meeting with the Planning Commission back in November. It was the will of this board to work through the analysis from the Berkeley group at the Planning Commission level and have all of that resolved before bringing it up for public hearing and bringing it back to us. And at the most recent Planning Commission meeting, there was discussion of already advertising for a public hearing when the map had not been addressed, and also further analysis of chapters 3 through 5 as requested or recommended by the Berkeley group had not been addressed by the Planning Commission. And so at that time it was tabled pending the seating of the new members of the Planning Commission and feedback from them. And I just wanted to bring that, especially, passing the torch to you, Mr. Fraser, on that. I know that you were at that November meeting and are very aware of that, but that movement is afoot to publicize it, and I did feel it was hasty given the outcome of the joint public hearing.
As I said, there's been a great reluctance to move certain things forward.
Any other items for consideration? All right. Well, I think that moves us into the discussion of the landfill that we were picking up earlier today. Had to be moved to the evening session.
We need to go back into closed session.
Yes. Unfortunately.
So we'll go back into a closed meeting for discussion of refuse and recycling contract terms, scope, and expenditure.
So if you'd like, I can, first let me say, before we get to that, the adjournment section of this meeting contemplated potential continuing this meeting till January 27th, which would be the date of the tower public hearings, which may or may not happen. So I would recommend that the board, that when we get to that point, adjourn. We'll work through a special call if we do in fact hold those hearings on the 27th. I can go ahead and advertise them well ahead of that special call. We'll work through that process and make sure that FOIA notice is made. FOIA notice would have to be made if it were continued anyway, so it's not that much of a difference.
You're going to advertise before a special call for the meeting itself?
We have to have, yeah.
They have to authorize you to do that.
You just did earlier.
But I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, this is government.
We're going to authorize you to advertise for a meeting and have an.
If you'd like, I can contact the chair tomorrow and have that special call signed tomorrow.
Well, that would seem a bit more appropriate.
So I wanted to clear that before we lose some people.
Yeah, thanks for keeping track of that.
Okay, so I don't have a printed motion, but I will do it. So I'll read a closed meeting motion for somebody to move and second. And then after the closed meeting, we will come back in open meeting to discuss the solid waste matter. So unfortunately, people would have to go downstairs, and then the discussion will probably take 10 or 15 minutes, and then people can come back up. Or we can go in the back. That's true.
Or you can take it out.
Whatever. So just want to make sure everybody's clear. Closed meeting would be for the Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors to conduct a closed meeting in accordance with Section 2.23711A of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, including bidders or offers, and discussion of terms or scope of such contract or discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body. Section 2.23711A 29. Subject matter of the closed meeting will be refuse and recycling contract terms, scope, and expenditures.
Do you have the award?
Miss Galvin, you're welcome to call me tomorrow if you want. If you want to know what we figured out. Come on, Christine. Get some
You ready? And I was distracted.
We'll make this quick.
She's not the only one. We've got a lot of older clients, especially. I mean, they're not used to computer technology, and so things that are basic to me. Now, that being said, when I first started working on Mac computers, it took me 20 minutes to figure out how to click.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So,
That's all I figured out. So she transitioned her website was built by this other lady, and evidently the background
still in the